If you'd like, feel free to close your eyes and just allow yourself to relax and be here in this moment for this time together, our final time together. Feel free to reflect if there's been any tiny incremental change, any spark in what might be different going forward. Any progress is beautiful progress. So Lord, we thank you. We thank you for these new friends. We thank you for this time together. We thank you for the beauty of slow, incremental behavior change over time. We thank you that your way is perfect and that you are teaching us to adapt to your way. And it'll be a lifelong exercise, but we thank you that you are gracious and you are patient and your love for us pervades our lives. We're grateful to you, Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. The beauty of incremental behavior change and changing our perspective to look at the things that deserve our focus and attention is a beautiful lifestyle change that a lot of you have adapted. And if you have not adapted it 7 days a week, that is an okay thing. If you have started to adapt it 1 day a week or one time per 1 day a week, that is a beautiful thing. So what I learned being in the back of the pack, because I was in the back of the pack, you guys, of the Orange County Marathon, I was oftentimes the last person, literally, where the guy in the golf cart was just like, "You okay, honey?" the whole time driving past me. But the lessons from the back of the pack are that if I am going slow, that means I'm still going forward. And if you are going slow with all of these concepts we've talked about, whether it's just beginning to think about looking at your debt and just beginning to think about looking at budgeting or spending or the gratitude practice, any of that, just the consideration of beginning to think about adopting these lifestyle changes in your life, it is a beautiful thing, and you are inching forward. So will you give yourself a hand really quick? Will you congratulate yourself for what you have done? Even if you have just considered it at this point, it is the beginning of life change for you, and I'm speaking to you from the back of the pack, which is a beautiful place to be. And the perceived scarcities in our life have the ability to have the same level of impact on our stress that actual real scarcities do for people, for example, in the developing world. So if you live in the United States of America, and if you work at any job at any level in the United States of America, you are amongst the top 15% of wealth in the entire world, on the globe, in the universe, possibly. The top 15% of wealth. When I learned that fact, it just recalibrated the lens a little bit through which I see my panic moments. The things that I can panic about sometimes, I have to put to the test of truth. You know, would these things truly be life-altering if they didn't happen? They would be life-altering, but would they be life-ending if they didn't happen? Probably not. So in our first round of the Soul and Money class, I had in mind the people that would come to the class would certainly be people who were experiencing some level of financial distress. And to some extent that was true, but what I discovered fairly early on was at our round tables, one table in particular, there was a woman who was facing both foreclosure and bankruptcy, and a couple that was feeling an immense amount of stress on their marriage because they own 3 restaurants and not 4. And the amount of stress for all of these people at this table, it is the same. The tears, the anxiety are the same. And that is what is unique about the human experience, that the stress on us relative at any level is going to feel the same. So that is why it is our duty to look at this stuff that happens to us through a lens of gratitude and filter out what is truth and what is not truth. So we talked last week about how scarcity and the mindset of scarcity is in fact a lie. And we're going to talk a little bit about today about how God's enoughness for us, sufficiency, is in fact the truth. That is the truth of life. It is a universal law that God provides an answer. He provides a perfect sufficiency to every need in this life, not every want in this life. And what enoughness is not abundance. So we talk a lot about abundance. And if you go onto Amazon's bookstore or walk into any bookstore, walk into Gosh, any church in America, any self-help type organization, what we will hear a lot about is abundance. Americans love abundance. We know this about us, right? We've become a little more self-aware, I think, in recent years. Americans love consumption, and the Western world is obsessed with the idea of more than enough. So doesn't it then kind of make sense that the authors we read, the podcasts we listen to some degree, even the sermons we hear on a regular basis would have a tilt towards abundance, right? The scriptures we focus on, a tilt towards abundance, right? And while God is in fact abundant, while it's in his character to be more than enough, while what he has is in fact more than enough, I'm going to put that system on trial a little bit. And I'm going to ask you to examine today for yourself where you see God's sufficiency rising up that is not always abundance. It's not always abundance. It is exactly what we need when we need it, even if that sometimes is painful. And there can be pain in that. So we're going to get into that fun topic in a little bit. But before we do, I just want to take it back a bit to gratitude, and we're going to do kind of a fun exercise together. So on your first page of your notes, there's like 5 or 6 lines there, and we're going to do an exercise. So Keith-Conti, will you come and frame this exercise up for us? So in our life and in our marriage, we talked about wanting to be really intentional about creating a culture of gratitude because we saw what it did for our marriage and our relationships with other people. We saw what it did for our relationships with our children. And just the tilt in our children's minds towards them seeing gratitude being modeled amongst us was big for us. So just in prayer, I think one day God kind of gave you this and nudged you toward this thing, and we started talking about it and got really excited about it. So anyway, I asked him to share it with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. So beautiful.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so we're going to do this practice. I was actually sitting at Starbucks and drinking some coffee, and then I thought we're doing the gratitude in the class. And then just out of inspiration, I was thinking about, award shows and the Oscars and all that, and people who get up there who are masters of their craft that have somehow altered their body or somehow, are the chiseled or the perfect, people that we look up to. So these are people who are at their pinnacle of their craft, receiving an award in front of millions of people. And they get a chance out of all the people that are in their category to get up and to share. And not one of them ever gets up and says, I am the greatest actor that has ever, I did this, I worked long hours, What you do see is immediate or immense gratitude come out and surface from within. And then all of a sudden it's a race against the clock to start to tell everybody that they had already pre-written, that they had forgotten, to tell everybody how grateful they are for them. We don't know these people's names at all, but all of a sudden directors and then they're trying to get it out, and so I thought to myself, what a powerful practice that would be to be able to write your own Oscar-winning speech for your own life of those who have helped you, impacted you, and given you what you need or lended you their greatness so that you could reach your pinnacle of where you're at. And all of us lend each other our greatness. There are those that are supporters that help lift you up, that support you. And so I went through and I wrote mine down, and see, this is where I'm cheating, but I went through this practice myself. And I said, first, I want to thank God, for without him, my life would be stuck in Hayward going in circles. He brought purpose and beauty into my life. This beauty looks like my wife, Nicole. Without her, I would be an island standing alone. Instead, I'm an island in a stream with no one in between. She's the one. That's from the Kenny Rogers song. Yeah, thanks. But she'd be crying if she was in the audience right now. Oh, he said my name. She's the one who's believed in me and inspired greatness within me. She's given me 3 of the greatest accomplishments I could ever have. My girls, the Conti girls. Watch out, world. These girls are going to make life worth living. So full of life they are. And if you're still awake, it's time to go to bed. I really got into it. It was the coffee. It was the caffeine. And then I said, the music starts to play. Like, you got to hurry up. And now I started thinking, oh, man, now I'm desperate just to start naming people because I want them to know how important they are to me. And so I start saying like pastors in my life, Pastor Steve, Eddie, Dennis Waller, the youth ministry, my in-laws. Oh God, my in-laws. Where do I begin? Endless love and support mean more to me than I can express. And then my mom, thank you for being who you are, your beautiful self. Every piece of growing up while hard never broke me. And I'm trying to hurry because the music is going. And now all of a sudden the music is shut off. And I said, thank you for loving me. The mic's off and I still start shouting to people, Roger Valsey, you were a preserver when my family was floating and you brought us in. Cassie, your friendship to us, an anchor to hold us. And Tim, you taught me your craft on how to play the piano. You guys get the point, right? So it's like I was trying to race against the clock. And then, so what I was thinking is on the back, there's some notes. We'll take a few minutes to write down your personal Oscar-winning speech.
But kind of fun to think about, kind of an interesting thought process to go through. If this is to happen sometime in life, what would I say? What would I savor? What would I want the world to know about my experience and the people in my experience and how it's been made richer because of those people? So, you know, I started to think when Keith texted me that day, I started to cry because I hadn't thought about the impact of the people that he mentioned, Pastor Roger and Cassie, and that those people were a life preserver for us in some of the darkest times in our life. And started to really think about that. And then I just thought, gosh, it would be so incredible if one day he did win an Oscar and he got to thank Pastor Roger and Cassie. But then I remembered he's not an actor, so that's a problem, right? And that probably is unlikely to happen. But then as a result of that, I was like, you have to text Roger, you have to text Cassie and tell them, right? And so that is where the sweetness lives. That's where the objective lives, because it doesn't matter if the world knows what Roger did for us. It matters that Roger knows what Roger did for us, right? So text those people in your life, call them, let them know that that you've been thinking about everything they've added to your life and how deeply you appreciate it. And it does something for our thinking, is the real gift. Gratitude is the one gift that we can give in this life and not be poorer for it, but richer for it. So with that, I want to, in a moment, invite up my really dear friends, Lauren and Andre Torres. And their journey and their experience is a pretty exciting one. So they're going to share the details of it with you. But yeah, I've only known them a short time, and in coming to know them, what is most striking about them and their story is they decided to live in a really adversarial way. They live in Orange County like we all do. They are millennials like we all are. Just kidding. But they have decided to make subversive decisions, that they wanted to get off this treadmill and resignation to debt and living like everybody else lives, so that they can have peace that very seldom do people come by, that are millennials in Orange County who were sort of born or ushered into at least student debt. And so their suggestions are amazing. The things that they have done to allow them to be debt-free and allow them to experience peace in their life are pretty fantastic things. They're not things that will work for everyone. Every journey is so unique and so different, right? So the things that work for them are meant to inspire, but that's the point, that they inspire us to find the things that are right for us to find the path that's best for us. So with that, will you give a hand to my friends, Lauren and Andre Torres?
I grew up in Santa Ana, but my parents got married very young. They were teenagers when they got married, and they had me very young. And my earliest memories with them were them arguing about finances or how they could provide for us. So to me, money was more of like something to be feared, something that caused stress. I felt like they felt they never had enough, and therefore I felt like there's no way that I would have enough money growing up. Growing up, I would always save my money for Christmases or birthdays, for anything that I wanted. So early on I learned how to manage my finances, but that kind of changed as I grew older. I went to school and I accumulated a lot of debt. Something that Lauren didn't have any. She didn't have any debt going to school. So I was pretty ashamed of that going into our relationship. She owed nothing, and I owed
tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt.
And we sat down, we did the math, like, okay, if we pay the minimum on the student loans, it'll take us at least 5 years before we can even start saving for a house. But I knew I wanted to like speed up the process and get there as soon as possible. So I did my own math, and I thought if we live on half of our income, we can pay this off significantly faster and get to our end goal of like buying property here in Orange County. So we decided to start living on one income, and of course that was really scary for us at first. We thought we wouldn't be able to do it. We thought maybe we'd be able to do it for like a month just to try it out. So I got serious. I brought up my Google Docs spreadsheet and I made up a budget for every single dollar that came in, and subtracting half of it to put directly towards the debt. And I learned that we could easily live off of far less than we were.
Yeah, it wasn't too hard once we started putting our minds to it. It was once the goal was set to pay off our debt, it made it a lot easier to say no to things. No, we don't need new phones. We've had our phones for like the last 4 years. We pay for the minimum. We don't have cable. We don't have home phones or anything like that. We just have our cell phone.
And I also think that for us, we were always thinking like, okay, we could use this money to go out to eat tonight when we have plenty of groceries at home, or this same amount can go towards our debt.
Yeah.
And then paying off the debt was like a game to me. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like we'll reach the next level faster if we don't go out to eat.
Yeah. Like our parents always say, tenemos comida en la casa. We have food at home. What do you need to go out for? We were also really good at finding like used furniture when we were furnishing our home. But yeah, like I don't think we've bought anything new since.
And being okay with that.
And being
like
okay with that. It's just being comfortable with saying no to things, saying no to the lifestyle that Orange County tends to tell you, hey, you need a new car, you need a new this, and we've learned to say no. That was like one of the biggest things with us too, is like our transparency. Like we merged our accounts together as soon as we got married, and that was like a big form of trust in each other. Like, hey, I'm here, I'm gonna make this work with you. And
it's a very vulnerable thing to do.
When we sat down and we talked about, okay, here's how much I owe, and I really didn't want to like, I hadn't looked at it since I applied for the loans because it was just something I didn't want to deal with. It's such a large number. No, it just needs to be worked on.
For your own freedom, so that you don't feel like a slave to
I know.
Your bills.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what life is about. Just here in Orange County, it's all about like material stuff.
And for us right now, it's kind of like traveling and doing your own thing. Like we recently celebrated getting out of debt by having a 2-week trip into Europe, and we pay that in cash basically. So we didn't. As soon as we came home, we paid off the credit card and with all the expenses that we had over there, and that was a big deal for us, not having to like. It
felt great, like going on vacation and not having to worry about the bill at the end.
Right.
I think during this journey, I learned that once money isn't a crutch, you learn a lot more about yourself. And I learned that I had to like start to love myself and take care of myself. And before I used to cover that up with like treating myself to new clothes or like new experiences when I didn't have the money for that. But now I know that I don't really need that. I need other things, like good relationships.
Yeah, when you're not part of the rat race, it opens up a lot of avenues for self-reflection. I think one of the biggest things that comes out of not necessarily buying the newest things is gratitude for what you already have, being grateful for the clothes on your back, a place to live, not necessarily looking for the next best thing. So that was the biggest thing I learned from this.
Anything in the human experience with chipping away tiny bit by tiny bit is in fact a doable thing. It can feel insurmountable, but our reality and perceived reality can be two different things. With that, we'll transition a little bit and we're going to talk about what sufficiency is. The exquisite experience of enough is what Lynn Twist calls this in The Soul of Money. And like we talked a bit about already, enough, what it's not, is more than enough. And do you feel sometimes that you hear that a ton, that the terms like overflowing and more than enough and abundance are pretty pervasive in our culture? Are these things that come up a lot for you, right? So, it gets real foggy around those things, right? Because the Bible does, in fact, express those truths to us. That God is and has more than enough. It's his character. He is infinite. Our Maker is infinite and splendid, and only when we pass through the thin veil between this life and eternity with him will we understand the nature of that infiniteness. On this side of that veil, though, it will be ours to grapple with what enough is and what his grandeur and glory is, and what we can understand about this life and what sufficiency is in fact. So I'll share with you guys that the journey in our life, when I started to really think about this, was when our now 6-year-old Francesca got very sick a year ago. So we were out one day in a canoe having a great day in the summer, just a few days before 4th of July. And we looked down at her little legs and they looked a little swollen. And Keith kind of made a joke about it. And he said, "Oh, look, she's getting mommy's legs. Thanks for that." And we kind of just laughed it off and no big deal. And the ride home, I just kept looking because it looked a little, just unusual. And then by the time we got home from that day, she was with my mom. And my mom started to notice that she seemed swollen, and my mom lifted up her shirt and literally screamed from the other room because her body was so swollen. And this happened very quickly in a matter of minutes. So we rushed to the hospital at that time, and what we found out is that she has a chronic kidney disease for which there isn't a cure. And this is what I learned about the medical system, or just maybe being a human. There's not a cure for everything. There's not an answer for everything. And that boggles the mind a little bit as a person who hasn't personally, first degree, dealt with significant health things. Because that's the point of doctors and that's the point of hospitals, right? To have an answer for you, or to at least be able to give some clarity about it. And such is not the case. Such is just not the case. There's not an answer. And so in Francesca's life, thankfully, we had a team of doctors and nurses around us that week that set us on a better path and put her on some medication where she's physically better. Emotionally, she still deals with significant anxiety. And if you have experienced anxiety in your adult life, you know how that can feel. So for a 6-year-old, it is very pronounced and it's significant, and it affects a lot of areas of her life and our family and the way that we journey through this thing called life. And so at that time, it is just it's a pressure cooker to be in that scenario, grappling with who God is, what he does, what he doesn't do. The desperation, as you can imagine, is next level, next depth, right? From any other desperation I had ever felt in my natural born human life, of course. And so, interestingly, one of the first thoughts that popped into my head in that scenario is, we'll sell the house. We'll sell the house and there's some money there, and then we'll solve this problem with that money, right? But in a moment, though, logic sets in that money is no match for disease. That there are some things in this life that money can solve and cure, and disease is not one of those things, unfortunately. And then so feeling like any superficial level of nets that I had imagined to be under me were gone, right? I figured doctors, the medical system, would be a net under me if anything like this ever happened, right? And you don't really perceive that these things are going to happen in your life, but the bottom, in fact, falls out, right? And then that net was gone because doctors just literally looked at me and shrugged. There was just nothing. This is the way this is. And then the net level under that of the perception that amount of money would be able to solve something like this for me in my life, right? Gone. Smoke, toast, gone. There's no net under me. So as every net under me seemed like it was dematerializing, learning to grapple with the idea, in fact, is God enough? Because I had heard through my Christian life in church things like everything happens for a reason, and a whole lot of Christian colloquialisms and kind of slogans, phrases, things people say when they are just really desiring in a genuine way to comfort you. But in those moments, what's true and what's not true, you really start to question all of that, right? So grappling with God about, in fact, is there sufficiency in this universe? In fact, is that a law? Because at that moment, I really needed to know. I really needed to know if there will be an answer for every question I have in this life. And if I am to lose this little girl, is there going to be an answer for that? And so the reason I talk about that today in this most extreme, in that really extreme space, is because if we can settle on the universal truth that in fact sufficiency is a law from our God to rise up to every need that we have in this life, but not every desire, if we can understand that at a macro level, and that will be something that you do not leave this class necessarily understanding. But the purpose of this conversation tonight is to start you with one foot on the journey of grappling with that idea with your Creator at home in private. If we can understand that at a macro level, then it becomes pervasive to every situation in our life and in our thinking. So sufficiency is in fact the truth, is what I'm going to assert for you today. And this is what your mission, if you choose to accept it, will be to go home and grapple with your Creator about. But if you are willing to let go of the chase to acquire or accumulate always more, or even sometimes to understand fully why a thing happens, if you let go of that way of perceiving the world, many cultures and many historic faiths hold the notion that attachment is the root of misery. And I could absolutely see how that was true in those moments. I think being in the children's ward of the hospital is the most desperate place possibly a person could physically be. The desperation is radiant that pours out of every room. And the attachment and the misery that comes with attachment is so palpable that you get a lot of clarity in those moments. And so if it's true that attachment breeds anxiety, and the attachment breeds misery. The attachment, the desperation for wanting to know the answer, the desperation for wanting to bend God into the answer that I need it to be. I need Him to be, to give me the answer that I am shaking my fist desperately for, if I'm being honest with you. They weren't kind prayers that were coming out of me. They were coming from a place of deep desperation and misery and longing and all the stages of grief, as you would imagine. But if in those moments we can begin the process of releasing the attachment to having the answers slowly, one finger at a time, because sometimes that is what it feels like. And sometimes this is the best we can do, that some days our attachment is released, and some days, if we're being honest, it's not. That's okay. That's an okay thing. But I will assert for you that when we can come to a place to live in a true surrendered state where we're okay with not knowing the reasons why, then we can come to a surrendered state of beginning to understand the concept of what sufficiency is. The context of sufficiency can transform our relationship with, yes, money, but also life itself. So I'm not suggesting that there is ample water in the deserts for people groups that are having to flee areas currently in our world where there's not water. And I'm not suggesting that there is enough food for the hungry and children in the Philippines that we once lived amongst. I'm not suggesting that necessarily. But what I'm saying is, even in the presence of genuine scarcity of external resources, the desire and capacity for self-sufficiency are innate, and they're enough to meet the challenges we face in this life. Sufficiency rises up precisely when we turn our attention to the inner resources of wealth, and we can begin to see the sufficiency that is available to us. And so that is the point of the gratitude exercise. You can take another journal with you, by the way, if that is one set of training wheels that is going to help you. But that's all this gratitude exercise for these last 4 weeks really boils down to: a recalibration in our thought, in the way that we think about things. Because when we turn our attention from the chase, from the acquisition of getting more, to turning our attention inward toward what we have, then it frees up oceans of energy towards having a rich and ultimately a fulfilled, satisfied life. A life filled with satisfaction, which ultimately is what we are after. So, when we do this, our soul and money interests merge, and they create a satisfying life. Now, understanding God's word as applies to this is what I'm left with. As a mama with a child who is walking through a hard thing and I don't have answers, there is still a peace. There is a net under me that is so stable. I am telling you this from pain, but it is also truth that I want you to know. There is a net under me that is so stable. I have a strong footing to move forward and say this with full integrity to a room full of people that I care about. There is a net under you. And the superficial money net, it's not real. Answers from doctors sometimes, not real. Sometimes even some of the human relationships we have, that net under us, can be time tested and prove that it's not real. But the net under you of the love and peace of your Creator, it is a real thing. It got so real for me in that room during those times and pervaded my life in such a palpable way after. Even on rough days, that net becomes more visible to me. So Isaiah 55:8, and we're going to wrap up in a moment here. But this is the one bit of clarity. This is the one bit of clarity that can be a guiding light as we grapple with this idea really for the rest of our lives. I don't think the way you think. The way you work isn't the way I work. God's decree. For as the sky soars high above the earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work, and the way I think is beyond what you think. Just as rain and snow descend from the skies and don't go back till they water the earth, doing their work, making things grow and blossom, producing seed for farmers and food and the hungry, so will the words that come out of my mouth and not come back empty-handed. They'll do the work I sent them to do. They'll complete the assignment I gave them. So that's the bit of clarity. That's the bit of clarity. And that's had an ordering effect on the way I think about what enough is and what enough isn't. And so that is the challenge. But when we are in daily gratitude practice, it's a recalibration, it's a tuning fork, where we can be in that moment and feel the vibration of what that gratitude feels like. Feel what it feels like in our physical body. Because there's science that says that when you are in gratitude practice, it actually relaxes your nervous system. And it has a physical impact on your life and the way you move through this earth. So if you allow this tuning fork of the gratitude practice to regulate you on a daily basis, then you'll have more clarity looking at the world to be able to see what in fact is enough and what isn't enough. When we're freaking out in these panic moments about not having enough, not having enough, not having enough, we can ask ourselves, is this life and death that I'm encountering? Is this a place of scarcity that I'm thinking about this from? If it's true that I am in the top 15% of wealth the world over, then is this thing I'm freaking out and having this level of anxiety about worth this level of anxiety? If 85% of the world doesn't even have what we have living in this nation and working at the jobs that we work at, it's worth asking the questions. So when we embrace God's sufficiency, we engage in life from a sense of our wholeness rather than a desperate longing to be complete. In our money culture, we operate according to a system of beliefs which uphold the notion my value can be ascertained in what I have, or my value can be ascertained in what I do. And neither thing is actually true. That is pervasive. And one of the lessons from being on the back end of the marathon journey is that everybody wants you to run at their pace. Everybody wants you to run at their pace. So that's why the question comes, or the pace they think you should be running at. So that's why the question comes constantly, what's next for you? What are you going to do next? Oh, you accomplished this thing, good job, what's next? Good job, what's next? Good job, what's next? Right? You accomplished a promotion at work, good job, what's next? Right? Because it's never enough. It's never enough for the external world, and we've sort of established that. So assessing our value from what we have says, I am a valuable person because I have valuable things. You'll be able to take this home and just take a minute and park with that thought for a minute. Assessing our value from what we do says, I am a valuable person because I make meaningful contributions. And that's even, see how tricky that is, right? Because we are wired to want to make meaningful contributions. But even that does not hold a candle to your inherent value to your maker. And if you leave our class and our time together understanding one thing, it's this thought, that you are exactly what he had in mind when he made you. And there is not one thing you can do, there's not one contribution you can make, worthy or unworthy, noble or unnoble, that makes you a shred more valuable in his eyes. You just are. Period. You just are. So it is okay to release. It is okay to say, I don't understand everything. I don't understand. And he is okay with you saying that. It is okay to ask him questions. It is okay to be angry. He can handle it. It is okay. So if you'd like, when you go home, you can run through these exercises. This is what I want you to understand as we wrap up about his love for you, though. When he was still a long way off, this is the story of the prodigal son who squandered everything. He made every bad decision imaginable, financial and otherwise, immoral. Everything that people could judge him for, he did. And even still, when he was a long way off, his father saw him, his heart pounding. He ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. The son started his speech. Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again. And this father, he just disregarded it. He threw a robe around him. He put a ring on his finger. He told the servant to kill the fatted calf because my son has returned. So know that. If there have been financial decisions in your life, it's of no consequence to him. It is of no consequence to him. And the message is you can turn that around too. And you will have the ability to turn that around too. But you can't do it alone. But ultimately, the big idea is that you are worthy. You are worthy. That there's nothing that you need to do to strive. There's nothing that you need to do to be. There's nothing you can wear. There's no title you can have. There's no letters after your name that make you whole. You're just whole because you're born that way. There's nothing you could do to even lose that role. There's nothing you could do to make him see you differently. So if you'd like to run through the exercise at home, it does take a conscious resetting of the old system of beliefs. This world and its messages are constantly telling us that we are not enough, that we are not enough, we are not enough, we are not rich enough, we are not thin enough, we are not young enough, we are not enough. And so it takes a subversive act to resist the old system of beliefs, to operate with our identity securely rooted in who you are. The only way to disentangle our humanity, our identity from what we have and what we do, or to perform a check on this are subversive acts. So 2 suggestions for subversive acts. would be times when I may have let what I have define me, and just sort of run through that when you're alone at home or doing the car. Times when I may have what I do, let what I do define me. And that's a trickier one. That's like a grayer area, because church work gets real foggy real fast, as you can imagine. Volunteer work gets real foggy real fast. But even those things, none of it defines you. And the moment we give them those things, those roles in our life, power to define us, then we start operating from a scarcity. So enough. We started this class with a big question. What's the one thing nobody in Orange County has? And the answer was enough. And I think that we have had just a tiny examination of some tools that we can recalibrate our minds and our hearts and our spirits to know that not only do we potentially have enough, but more importantly, that you are enough, that you are just enough, exactly what he had in mind when he needs you. No changes, no revisions necessary. So closing out our time together with this scripture, let's read it together. Actually, I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content whatever my circumstances. I'm just as happy with little as with much or as little. I've found the recipe for being happy, whether I'm full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. So, Father, I thank you so much for these beautiful friends. I thank you so much, Father, for the richness that they've added to each other's lives and to our lives. In Jesus' name, would you whisper to them their wholeness that they could only find in you? You have a way of communicating eons of information to us in a momentary download, so infinitely better than another human could communicate that to us. So would you do that, Lord? Would you do that for my friends? Would you communicate their wholeness to them? Would you allow them to know that there is no participation in the system needed that tells them that they are not enough, that they are simply enough, that you are enough, and that you provide enough. Even when that is painful, you provide enough. Would you allow us to daily examine our hearts, and would you allow us to excavate the gratitudes that are buried deep in there? Because when they come to the surface and they get expressed, God, they're given life, and they give us life. So I thank you so much for this journey with these beautiful people. Would you bless them exponentially? Would you bless them deeply and wholly and with wisdom about how to use every resource in their hands to live out their highest value? I thank you so much for every one of them. Bless them, Father. Amen.